Robert Bussian was the Director for Cyber and Strategic Enabling in the Concepts Development and Management Office under the Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force in Arlington. SAF CDM develops and implements initiatives and activities for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, as well as for the Secretary of the Air Force. In this role, Mr. Bussian is the principal advisor, or was the principal advisor to the Director of CDM for assessing technical and operational risks, identifying optimized strategies, determining operational efficiency to meet cyberspace, information, and applied technology requirements for intelligence activities and operations. Please welcome the panel.
Thanks, Bob. As Bob said, Robert Bussian, now with Oracle's National Security Group as Vice President for Mission Integration. I fully recognize the panel's role in this conference, which is as the last session of the day, to be extremely brief, as we're the last item between you all and the beer line that's already forming, the gym, or your last meal of the day of this first day of the fantastic conference. Anyway, joining me on stage is an esteemed group of colleagues representing Intel leadership across the United States Air Force. Unfortunately, we're not represented today with our new sister service, the U.S. Space Force, but they'll be providing a keynote session at the conference, so please tune in to Lieutenant General Saltzman's speech scheduled later this week. With that, I'd like to introduce the three panelists who collectively represent over 75 years, yeah guys, you are that old, of Intel support and bring experience across every level of organizations within both DoD and the IC, from Air Force Squadron and Wings, to intelligence production centers, three-letter agencies, combatant commands, service headquarters, joint and OSD staff, as well as the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And you got Kevin Miner right here in the front row to keep you honest as we do that. You think with that experience they'd look a lot older, but I can say that as I'm the oldest Air Force Academy alum of the four of us that all decided to go through that program years ago. But I can't say that experience, much of it is related and focused on the growth and evolution within geospatial intelligence, which has been inherent in the Air Force's DNA. So closest from my left, Brigadier General Max Pearson, the Director for ISR Operations, Deputy Chief of Staff, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance and Cyber Effects, Headquarters, U.S. Air Force. Next to General Pearson, Brigadier General Steve Gorski, the Director of Intelligence, Headquarters Air Combat Command. And then Dr. Carl Brenner, an intelligence senior executive and technical advisor for Geospatial and Signatures Intelligence Group, National Air and Space Intelligence Center. I'd like to start the panel with their introductory remarks, followed by a few questions from me for the panel, and most importantly, time for questions from you to gain their valuable insight. So with that, I'll start over with you, General Pearson.
Yeah, it is live. Thanks, Bus. It's a real pleasure to be here today and share a few comments with you all. In my capacity on air staff, as Bus said, Director of ISR Operations, I largely describe our role as doing two things. We provide the policy oversight and guidance for the Air Force ISR forces broadly, and then second, we represent those forces and their equities to other elements of air staff, other service staffs, and combat support agencies. From an Air Force perspective, when we consider GEOINT, we have GEOINT integrated, I would say, in almost all of the activities that we do within the directorate that I lead. What I thought I would do today for opening remarks is just briefly share a few big picture perspectives from air staff, and then pause to hear from the fantastic gentleman here to my left. So, big picture, I thought I would start is highlighting that, you know, from a headquarters air staff, we've certainly seen, like many in this room recognize, a big change within the DoD ISR ecosystem from what I would describe as sort of a scarcity of data and sensors in the last maybe a couple of decades or less to a environment of abundance. And that has really changed how we do operations. From a big picture perspective, on the human capital side, what we have done within the Air Force is largely transition our organizational construct from teaming our workforce around individual sensors when we had fewer sensors to now with all the sensors and all the data available, now we team that workforce around problem sets, right? So we have a problem-centric, sensor-agnostic approach, and that applies in many aspects of Air Force ISR, certainly within the Air Force DCGS, where we focus on that battle space awareness, also in other elements that I think will get discussed here by my colleagues. That's human capital. From a technology perspective, we are focused, as are many in this audience, on augmentation, automation, and artificial intelligence, or AAA. So that is definitely something we invest in. We work to try to integrate into everything we're doing. Those are broad changes: human capital, technology. The last thing I'll say, opening remarks, and then I'll pause for the others, is that as we talk about teaming within the Air Force, we have, especially within 16th Air Force, teamed those airmen that are working on geospatial intelligence analysis and exploitation, not just with other airmen from other disciplines, all source analysts, cryptologic analysts, et cetera. We have also teaming them with other elements of 16th Air Force in a information warfare construct. So think cyber effects operations, information operations, as well as our Air Force Weather Wing. So that team together is the teaming sort of construct we're taking within the Air Force.
Thanks, I appreciate that, General Pearson. General Gorski?
Well, thanks, Bus. Thanks for having us on this panel, getting us together. It's great to see old friends, and thanks to the GEOINT team for having us as well. In my role as the Director of Intelligence for Air Combat Command, I advise Commander of ACC on the 35 wings that he runs, over 1,300 units around the globe, conducting combat operations on behalf of the Air Force. From the drivers that Max talked about, there are a lot of in addition to technology and the people aspect, I'd add the threat has been a major driver to change how we do business on a daily basis. And of course, GEOINT products are core to what we do in the Air Force, as well as the geospatial services that are provided. It used to be maps and charts. It's not anymore, right? It's the exquisite data that's loaded not only on the platforms, but on the weapons themselves so that they can be as effective as possible. And what the threat is doing is China and Russia field credible capability to push us out further with our theater ISR assets. It makes us turn to other options to present that same decision quality information. And so as we go forward with our Air Force ISR enterprise, we want to be connected, persistent, and survivable. Connected in a way that we can't have stovepipes anymore. We can't have platforms that just go to a special back room anymore and everyone doesn't get to see the data. It's got to be shared across the joint, the IC community, and our allies and partners, and that's got to happen near real time, if not real time. Persistent, in that for ACC, those long threat ranges, that long standoff means that the flight time of a weapon, if we're actually in contested wartime, that's a long flyout time, and many of these important targets are mobile and have the opportunity to move or fix targets. We need to maintain custody over very long periods of time. And so we need that persistence, but we don't have the luxury that we did in a coin fight where we're going to park a single asset over the top and just stare directly down at it for that time. And so instead, it's going to be a series of sensors across multiple domains, across multiple phenomenologies, and we have to fuse that picture together. And then finally, survivable, in that we're going to have a mix of penetrating ISR that can survive in a highly contested environment, stand off in the airborne layer, and then look to our sister service in the Space Force for additional data, and of course, cyber throughout to get a very persistent look at what's going on. From an ACC perspective, also one of our plays to be survivable, our strategy is agile combat employment, so that we're going to be operating in a highly contested environment under the envelope of some of those threats, but we're going to use maneuver as our ability to generate combat power in that kind of environment. And so happy to answer questions on any of those topics as we go forward, but I'll turn over to Dr. Brenner.
Thanks. Thanks also to USGF for hosting us. Thanks for my wingman for being here as well. It's my privilege working at NASIC, the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, to be working a complementary part of the problem set to what you've just heard about from the HAF A26 and also from the ACC A2 lens. We're focused very heavily, relentlessly really, on the scientific and technical intelligence characterization of adversary capabilities. So I'm concerned about being able to characterize the capabilities, performance, limitations, vulnerabilities of adversary weapon systems, and the Chinese and Russians have certainly given us a great deal to work on there, so they've kept us super busy. We've got a great team at NASIC. I like to call it a great integrated GEOINT team, integrated in, I think, really a model way. We have, of course, people in uniform. We have airmen in uniform. We've got Air Force civilians. We've got NGA civilians. We've got contractors. When you walk onto our analytical floor or analytical spaces, you can't tell who is who, except for the people in uniform. Everybody's integrated in common teams on common problems, just like you've heard here too. So we're all teaming together, all in the same workspace, all in the same tools. Many of those tools provided to us by broader NSG capabilities that came from the commercial sector, that came from open source, or that we developed and shared across the Air Force as well. So it's been really a tremendous privilege to work on that. At NASIC, we're dramatically accelerating a digital transformation, and I'm sure you are in your organizations too. And so we have some successes already under our belt in automating, providing augmentation, machine learning, stretching out toward artificial intelligence, and we really need to seek and pursue more of those as well, and we need to partner much more broadly in order to succeed with that. And so really, in pursuit of this digital transformation, to keep up with the Chinese, to be able to characterize performance limitations, vulnerabilities as well, we really need to do, to my mind, at least 4 different things. One of those things being that we need to move models to be at the center point of our analytical capability in the kind of GEOINT that we pursue. So models rather than graphical or textual processes. 2, we do need to continue to replace manual processes with automated processes. We can be completely agnostic about where those processes came from. Sometimes we invent them. Even better when we can borrow them from the broader NSG. We can borrow them from other services, take them in from commercial partners, take them in from open source or academic sources as well. 3, we need to continue to build our team. The skills that brought our team to this point are not the skills that we need forward. We need data scientists, we need cloud engineering expertise, and we need it at much greater scale than we currently have it. Sometimes the answer will be that we'll go out and we'll hire those people in government. And sometimes it'll be that we team with many of you in order to get that done as well. So we need to be able to build teams with these new capabilities to help us realize new advantages. And then fourthly, I think we need to more tightly link across all our enterprises. We need, and we were talking about this right before this program, we need to more tightly lash up across the air forces, across the joint forces, across DoD and IC, with industry partners, with open source partners, and with allies as well. So I think those are 4 things that we've got in front of us as really to-dos for all of us. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate that, Dr. Brenner. I'll go ahead and start with a few questions for the panel here. You know, it was mentioned in the remarks, the Air Force very traditionally over a long period of time has operated from a platform-centric model. But you all talk about this from a problem-centric model. Could you expand a little bit on how GEOINT's being used as the Air Force looks at this from both a data and problem-centric approaches?
Sure, I'll start quick and then ask probably at least General Gorski, if not both gentlemen, to talk about it. GEOINT, I would say, is really the foundation of that transformation that I discussed, where we originally, if we back up 5-6 years, we had geospatial analysts who would have identified themselves as a crew member associated with an airborne platform. We had analysts that would say, you know, I'm a U2 crew member, and I've been a U2 crew member, right? And that is really where we found the greatest opportunity in the GEOINT discipline to make that transformation to integrate data from other sources, airborne as well as national as well as commercial, and so that sort of cued us in. When we made that transition, though, we didn't just make it with the geospatial intelligence analysts. We teamed them. Instead of just teaming geospatial analysts taking a sensor agnostic approach to a problem, we teamed them with analysts of every other flavor that we had available to try to create a cross-functional team that could integrate, you know, multiple intelligence disciplines. But I would really say that the expanse of GEOINT sensors and data available really sort of drove that move for us. And the last thing I would just say is the move in many ways, to provide a comment from Headquarters Air Force perspective, was driven by a recognition that we could not scale airmen as sensors and data increased. That really drove the change. So broadly speaking, that's what I would say.
I'd like to add on to that. I'd say, you know, and what are those teams doing, right? We've got this problem-centric approach, looking at specific targets, and they're becoming subject matter experts on a particular target set, whether that's, you know, Russian IADs or, you know, Chinese surface vessels. They're becoming the expert, or at least within our service. Then they're part of the analytic community that can reach out to the rest of the IC and really hone their craft on what that target is doing. But they're watching it in a real-time way, and that's where the GEOINT becomes in. And it's really about object-based production, which is where the intelligence community and certainly the services are headed in that direction. And that's the ability to bring all the things that we observe and sense over many different domains and phenomenologies and tie it to the particular object, which of course is tied to a place on the Earth at any given time. And the ability and the speed at which we're able to do that will turn, you know, was this observation the same target that was there 5 minutes ago? Is it another one? Is it important to me or not? Is it a threat to my mission? It will answer those questions. Of course, with object-based production requires some standards that we have to work on across the government to make sure that we're all talking the same language as we're producing.
I'd say that our piece at NASIC is to complement what it is that you two are doing, where you're offering speed and operational immediacy, relevance. We are offering depth and expertise by bringing in additional capabilities. You know, our SAR experts are SAR scientists, our spectral experts are spectral scientists, and so we bring that to the mix as well. Additionally, our teaming construct at NASIC includes not just GEOINTers, SIGINTers, MASINTers, but also systems analysts who are the all-source engineers of weapon systems, adversary aircraft, adversary C4 systems, adversary missiles. And so when you sit down, say, an adversary ballistic missile analyst with his OPIR analyst and the MASIN analyst, they can come up with some great ideas, some insights that otherwise, that say an intel, say classic int-focused approach, wouldn't come up with at all. And so that we then bring together as being foundational and then supporting of, you know, these are the underlying signatures, the underlying adversary capabilities that you're seeing and that we're collecting against, say, in an ABMS or a JADC2 construct.
And if I can just add real quick to complete the picture, a lot of what the airmen within that Air Force DCGS, where we made the transition, when we started to create teams around problem sets, as General Gorski said, as Steve said, those teams really reached out to NASIC because they needed to start to develop an understanding of the target set of a specific weapon system. And so that teaming has been really, really valuable.
No, thank you all. I'm going to follow up. I mentioned in my opening remarks how GEOINT is inherent in the Air Force's DNA. You all brought up some of the great IW work coming out of General Tim Hawk's team at 16th Air Force, as well as new approaches and threat analyses out of NASIC. Could you expand on how you're leveraging GEOINT in current roles and missions, and any applicability you can speak to in the current Ukraine crisis?
Sure, I'll take a shot first at that one. First of all, like I said, GEOINT is underscores it's critical, foundational to everything that we do in the Air Force from an Air Force mission standpoint. Some newer things I want to touch on. For sure, the dynamic targeting problem is getting harder, as I mentioned, but also indications and warning. So we've operated from permissive bases at long ranges that have been just out of the fight for a while. And now with Agile Combat Employment, we're going to be within that threat range as well. And so we need to provide to local commanders that same indication and warning that our Army and Marine brethren have known about and have practiced for quite some time. So that's just a new addition. I'd also add to get faster at our targeting process. As 3D GEOINT comes around, that's led by NGA and supported by many of the people in the room, it certainly has been considerable commercial investment in that. That is going to be the ability to generate a 3D point cloud of a target area of considerable size, complete with error. And the error is important for the precision and accuracy that we're looking for targeting. And so that trend, as that continues, is going to be heavily leveraged by the Air Force, and I'm sure other services, and specifically that first application will be in that dynamic targeting realm. The other piece that I want to just touch on is this automated dissemination. When we talk about getting data from sensor to shooter, which is really what ABMS and JADC2 is all about, is connecting our sensors and our C2 elements and our shooters. We've got to work on that automation so that we're not typing in coordinates again. We're not going from different systems and having airmen use sticky notes as the tool of choice. And so we've made some progress using both government and commercial tools in doing things that weren't necessarily designed for that purpose, but we're showing positive results, and we're dramatically shrinking kill chains to the point where we're able to turn around key targets in single-digit minutes. That whole architecture has got to continue to be sped up and invested in so that we can do that for more target sets at scale.
Thank you, and I'm glad, next question, you brought up the point of Joint All-Domain Command and Control, the Air Force's contribution to the Air Battle Management System, ABMS, which clearly is a lot of discussion and buzz within senior leadership, not only in department, but in the industry leadership as well. Can you all discuss how GEOINT and the larger intelligence perspective is being integrated into these approaches and the subsequent architecture supporting?
Sure, I'll start. But it's largely the role of Air Force intelligence and ABMS is to deliver decision quality, actionable, either coordinates for targets or tracks for movers that are a potential threat to our mission. Along with that has got to be the foundational intelligence so that we understand what that actor is doing, and then we've got to be able to optimize our weapons for optimal performance. And so those three things is what we want to deliver to the C2 portion of ABMS and onto JADC2. I'd say that we've been exercising that significantly with our joint partners, and so whether that's Scarlet Dragon that I heard mentioned earlier today, or Resolute Hunter with the Navy, but we've gotten better at the machine-to-machine of information connecting an F-35 to an Army shooter. And it's not directly about connecting those platforms. It's about publishing your data or getting your data out into a cloud-like architecture that can be pulled, because you don't know who the shooter is going to be in that kind of highly contested environment. So it's about the movement of the data to where it's accessible for any shooter that can go pull, and let our C2 organizations assign that.
If I can add, just briefly from the headquarters perspective, when we have discussions about sensor to shooter and ABMS in the air staff, I do spend a bit of time highlighting to my colleagues on the staff that the intelligence, the foundational and fundamental intelligence that we rely on day to day to characterize the battle space is still a big part of fueling and enabling an environment in which we could envision sensor to shooter happening at rapid speeds and at scale that General Gorski talks about. We know that's the common target, but I just to your specific question, GEOINT's role, I try to make sure that my colleagues on air staff don't forget or don't sort of omit in their thinking that there's still an enormous amount of fundamental intelligence, everything from foundational military intelligence that characterizes signatures that we can use to program correlation criteria, to the geospatial intelligence role in characterizing the battle space so that we can make collateral damage risk assessments to determine that we are ready to, automate and let the sensor to shooter sort of paths rip, right? I think the role of GEOINT and the role of intelligence is very important. And as we talk sensor to shooter, I often find myself reminding my colleagues that there's a whole lot of intelligence, to include a lot of geospatial intelligence that surrounds all of that.
And we're going to get back to that issue of automation and the role of multi-int towards that JADC2 concept. But I want to turn towards one of the points you just made, General Pearson, as it ties to that foundational intelligence. Dr. Brenner, in your opening comments, you talked about this idea of moving away from our traditional flat textual graphical products and moving our primary S&TI intelligence products more towards interactive models. Can you kind of expand on that?
Sure, and this also relates pretty tightly with something that General Gorski talked about. GEOINT people are maybe too good at graphical products and pretty good at written products these days too. And so, we've all grown up in an environment of the graphical product with the text narrative, things called out on it. Increasingly you see Sedalian remarks and GEOINT notes and things like that. And so that's the reality, I think, still of how much GEOINT production is done. But when we talk to combatant commanders, when we talk to wing commanders, when we talk to acquisition decision makers, they really are not as interested in in-depth graphical products. What they want is something they can interact with. And so for that, I use the shorthand of a model. They want a model that they can interact with, something that they can load into their own trainer, into their own mission planning system, into their own analysis of alternatives for acquisition decisions, and then run a simulation 1,000 times, make changes, run it 1,000 more, and really help them inform their hard decisions all the time. Some of the time, the model might literally be a model, right? It might be an engineering level model. It might be a parametric model. Other times, I'm really just talking about a digital representation, like a track is a representation of a flight course or a trajectory. A signature is a model of, how a particular sensor would happen to perceive something. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about starting to emphasize the production of models, particularly in the scientific and technical intelligence production, over flat and textual graphical products as well, just because there's so much demand for it and there's so much opportunity to use it.
I'd like to add, just from a tactical perspective on the models, so we know we cannot train to the current peer fight on any range in the United States or really any range in the world, because we just don't have the size. We're not going to be able to shut down LAX, for example, and we're not going to be able to jam in CONUS. We're not going to be able to flex all the muscles and use all the tools that we can in real world as we prepare for a peer fight, which takes us to the virtual world. And as the Virtual Test and Training Center stands up out at Nellis, we are expanding and pushing the envelope of how we're going to train our aviators to fight. Their first 10 combat sorties won't always be real. It'll be more realistic when it's virtual. And so we're reliant on those foundational intelligence models to then make their way into that virtual training environment. So we're representing the best, most realistic threat possible.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to the ABMS discussion for a moment. And, there's been a lot of focus within JADC2 on the aspect of the data. But you all talked about, and General Pearson, you mentioned that role of multi-int within that. And I had two questions from the audience that were right in line with this. What's the way forward in this idea of cross-queuing and involving the multi-int capability that supports that warfight?
I think that goes back to the object-based production and the fusion, right? So there's certainly a set of tools that are needed there to create that fusion so that we can tie that multi-int together. And so we might get a SIGINT hit at one point or an ATR hit off of imagery at another point in time, but we know it's the same object because we've been tracking it through different sources of intelligence, or a PAI hit from someone's cell phone camera on that object. And so that fusion has to happen, and that's where the direction that we're headed to.
And I would just add that it has to happen, and it has to happen at speed and at scale. And that's so important. That's why, object-based production is so important, to reduce the number of, intelligence injects that we are pushing to warfighters, and where possible, fuse them into a single object that they can act, react to, etc.
I like that point a lot, General Pearson, about people have asked, is there enough GEOINT? Is there too much GEOINT? But it's not so much about enough or too much. It's about right. And so I think that the way that you put it really characterizes that.
And we've done that exercise. We have automated everything, right? We've done the exercise where we've taken every sensor collected and pushed it through the system. Our battle managers, our C2 element chokes on it. It's just too much data. And so we have to be focused on pushing the right data. What are the threats that can actually impact the mission? Which target of opportunity, high value target, is presented itself and needs to be actioned immediately? And that's where the sense making has to happen. And that's what this enterprise is here for.
Can I say real quick? I think I'd be remiss if I didn't, we're talking a lot about JADC2, ABMS, time sensitive, speed, scale, all very important. I don't want us to forget about, again, a role I often play in the headquarters, right? I don't want us to forget about the value of keeping data available for exploitation, because we have over time, certainly even in the Air Force, analysis and exploitation teams supporting combatant commands, we have found that there are times, and they are not seldom, they're in fact more often than I think most people would suspect, that we get a question and we are able to answer the question based on the data we have, and we do not need additional new collection for. So I love the discussion, and certainly I have huge respect for the work that General Gorski and ACC is doing, and we're helping facilitate from a distance to get to the speed and scale. But just understand that looking back in the data is still a very important role that we play.
I'd like to add that looking back in the data, of course, in the scientific and technical intelligence business is absolutely huge, and in many respects becoming more important, because your historical data will provide you with the training sets that you need for the machine learning. And so the ability to smartly curate your machine learning training sets to produce those also as models that others can build upon for other training activities, that is itself really useful. And so we have to be smarter than we're going to keep all the data, not possible. And so developing schema for keeping data most useful for future development of automation against object-based production, that can be very powerful.
No, thank you. And I think that brings us to a question from the audience. When you guys started in the part of the discussion with this idea of, we went from, in the past few decades, a challenge of collection to now the challenge of sense making, especially at scale and speed. Can you talk a little bit about where you see AI and ML making the most impact as it relates to GEOINT and intelligence in toto?
I think the obvious answer, perhaps to this crowd a platitude, is that automated target recognition and an ability, giving us an ability to quickly sift through an enormous amount of data is probably the first simple upfront answer. And I probably don't need to spend a lot of time talking about that here. What I would add for consideration, because I don't hear this discussed a lot, but I have talked about it with many partners and folks in government, is that we also need to consider the potential for AI/ML to look back in the data, right? Very often we talk about AI/ML helping us make sense of something that happened now, something that was just collected. Fuse, as General Gorski said, automated target recognition correlated to a SIGINT hit that enables us to cue a shooter. That's fantastic. I would also highlight that as we continue to amass massive amounts of data, we are going to need AI/ML to also span a time horizon or look at, temporally across a spectrum to help us go back and look in historical repositories of data to make sense of what just happened. In other words, we can't just think about making sense of the current and now based on other collect from the current and now, or sort of horizontally in a time horizon. We have to also use that technology to help us look deep into old historic data.
And that is at NASIC how we would use it, for example. We would use AI/ML in order to help us to, over time, characterize the performance expectations of an adversary weapon system, and then in more real time, to be able to identify anomalies to those expectations. That then enables the analyst to spend their time super wisely. They can look at the anomalies, those things that fell outside the expected performance envelope of the system, and go after that instead of going after the thousands of data points that fell within the expectations. So over time, the systems can become smarter, and they can make the analyst more effective and more better able to apply his or her efforts.
I'd like to go back to that opening remark you made about automated target recognition, General Pearson. I think that we've certainly seen a lot in the commercial space, NGA, Maven, right? We've seen that technology come along and starting to take some of the burden off the man hours that are required to do that work. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. As we start getting our analysts into doing activity-based models, we can start to highlight when this object and this object come together, hey, that's a refueling operation for a bomber, and we know that something's about to happen, that bomber is going to take off and either do a local training sortie or do an out-of-area deployment that's going to be a threat that NORTHCOM's going to care about, that our combatant commands are really going to be interested in. And so that activity-based modeling is the next step, and as we tie objects together, we can start to show the relevance of that, and we can push further to the right, where our AI is applied, and get to the point where we're doing predictive collection. We're saying this hasn't happened yet, but we believe based on all this modeling that it's going to, and let's get the right sensor at the right place to collect on that data to make sure it is a local training sortie and not something that's headed as a threat to the homeland.
Okay, another question from the audience, and I think this one comes from somebody either current or an alum of the Combat Air Force's CAF. As we talk about that, quote, close-in fight getting extended further and further out, if we look at A2AD environments, you talked about agile combat employment, even broader than just GEOINT, but how do we ensure the availability of timely intelligence in those areas of contested environments? We talked early on about the role of IW writ large. Can you talk a little bit about where we are from an EMSO perspective, electronic magnetic spectrum operations, and ensuring, connectivity for our forces in those degraded environments?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd be remiss from being from Headquarters Air Force A26 if I didn't say that a few years ago the Air Force recognized this problem and took it so seriously that we stood up a one-star directorate within the A5 that has transitioned to the A26, that is the Electromagnetic Spectrum Operations Directorate, currently headed by Brigadier General Clark. And so we certainly recognize it and are working hard at it. If I could just broadly say here, I think the vision, the theory, the work we are going, the objective we're working towards is an environment in which we know we have a whole lot of sensors, government, commercial, airborne, space-based, surface-based, maritime-based, etc. The idea is that by connecting all of those and enabling those sensors to connect and fuse data as quickly as possible with wise algorithms driving that as some sensors drop out or are threatened or some data links get attacked, that we still have enough capability, enough redundancy in a sensing web. I know we talk a lot about a sensing grid. I like to talk about a sensing web. I think we all probably understand that concept, but that's the vision. That's what we're working forward towards.
So I'd like to just add on to that a little bit. First, from an agile combat employment standpoint, we need agility, right? We absolutely need agility in the spectrum that we operate in, and to make sure that we communicate in, that we have a pace plan. That hasn't been something that we've practiced regularly a whole lot of times. We're going to have 5 wings become IOC as lead wings in 2023. Their mission, their certification is going to be the ability to go out and go to a remote location and practice operating from what we haven't done in a long time, which is not a dedicated airfield for the United States Air Force. And so that we'll get reps and sets in doing that, and that will give us that ability to work through a pace plan to make sure that we can communicate. I'd say the other piece is we've got to learn a lot from the Navy. The Navy's been doing MCON, they say, since World War II at least, right? And we haven't had to worry about that. And that is being brought to these same exercises where we're understanding what our signature is, what the enemy is going to be looking for, and how to mitigate those signatures.
And can I just say, I thought Steve may cover this, but multi-domain command and control as a concept, this really applies to your question, right? The idea is that we don't want to do command and control, or we don't want to pass sensor data in a single medium. So when General Gorski talks about agility, that's agility in space. It's also an agility in communication. You could say there's an agility in frequency, but certainly an agility in communication method or means as well, right? And so that is something we absolutely talk about. It's something we are working on, developing and building into to our systems.
No, thank you for that. And I really like this question that came in from the audience. We've talked a lot about technologies, capabilities, processes, but as each of you are leaders within your disciplines with over 25 years each experience, one of your responsibilities clearly is growing that next generation set. The question got asked is there a capability or functionality for human capital management needed in order to support this new emerging work and ideas?
I addressed some of these in my comments. There are a whole variety of digital skill sets that we need. And we need some form of digital fluency from nearly everybody involved in the GEOINT or any other kind of intelligence business, right? So you might be an aeronautical engineer, but you better develop digital fluency as well. Then we need specialists. And this is where we need to onboard new skills. The cloud architects, we need more people who are data scientists, image scientists, and a bunch of other disciplines as well to contribute too. So we need to grow that and bring it on any way we can. In uniform, we need some. We need some who are civilians, our contractor teammates, our partners as well. So absolutely, there's a huge need for a transformation on the human capital side, and human capital professionals, we really need you to pull this along with us. You can make a huge contribution to the mission here.
I know we're short on time. I'll be real brief, but from a Headquarters Air Force perspective, the A1 community has and continues to work on integrating technology into talent management. One of the ones I'll just broadly describe is a system called, the talent management, where when an airman gets ready to move, look for new jobs, they see a list of jobs available, they're able to look at those jobs, the descriptions of those jobs include specific skill sets required, and they are able to sort of say, hey, like, here's my credentials to meet the need that you have. Even though I'm an Intel analyst, that doesn't necessarily mean I code in Python, but like I love coding in Python, and they're able to sort of explain themselves. And so Talent Marketplace is the system we're using. It's not perfect. We continue to make it better, but that is one of multiple initiatives to try to better match talent to the jobs they want, to retain the talent. And there are certainly other initiatives underway to identify specific and develop specific talents that we need targeted for this environment. But I know we're short on time. We're working on it. It's certainly a challenge to do that at scale because we have a lot of airmen, but the team leans in hard, and frankly, we spend a lot more time at the senior levels talking about talent management than I suspect most airmen that give me feedback. I don't think they recognize it.
All right, and this is, we're running out of time here, so I just want to close with my thanks again to USGIF for allowing us to participate in this, for these incredible panelists that bring decades of experience across their disciplines and in their current roles. And speaking of roles, many of you may have heard this morning that for General Pearson, his future boss identified his next role soon to move over as the Associate Director for Operations at NGA. So congratulations, General Pearson, and thanks to the entire panel.